Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. I want you to imagine, just for a second, that your mind is a heavily guarded fortress. But here's the catch. The guards aren't keeping intruders out. They're actually keeping you locked inside. We rarely question the foundations of our certainty. We walk around completely convinced that we're on the right path, navigating our lives with absolute total confidence. But what if the map we're using has been entirely distorted? Today, we're embarking on a journey to reverse engineer our own perception. We're going to systematically dismantle this inherited mental programming that we've somehow confused with absolute truth. And we're going to rebuild our understanding directly from the source itself. And it all starts with a very simple yet honestly quite dangerous question about why we know what we think we know. Take a look at the profound simplicity of Bertrand Russell's observation right here. Now, a voice inside your head might immediately react, well, it's just math, of course it's true. But if we deconstruct this for a moment, Russell isn't just talking about multiplication tables. He's diagnosing a core human condition. The issue isn't that we believe something, but why we believe it. Our deepest convictions, the very things we would literally swear our lives on, have often never been truly examined by us. They've just settled into our minds through repetition, through authority, and through habit. We believe it because we were told it in childhood, and respectable people just kept repeating it. It's an inherited certainty, right? Not a discovered truth. So the crucial point is this. If we can accept that our most basic, fundamental mathematical assumptions are often just inherited habits, what happens when we pivot to our religious dogmas? What about our deepest spiritual convictions? Is our perception of reality itself just a fragile spiderweb of inherited thought? We walk through life completely certain that we're guided, but this certainty might just be a really comfortable illusion. We are, essentially, operating within a multi-dimensional matrix of belief, and to escape it, we have to stop accepting things simply because they've been repeated to us for generations. Which brings us to Section 1, Dismantling Inherited Certainty. We really need to start looking at ancient texts not as historical storybooks, but as incredibly precise blueprints of human psychology. Tradition often tells us that when these texts speak of magic or knots, they're talking about external, mystical spells cast by ancient people. But if we reverse engineer this based strictly on the source itself, a totally different reality emerges. These knots, or alokad, are actually a diagnosis of internal psychological traps. Think of them as neuro-linguistic programming carefully woven into a fragile, spider-web-like structure right there in your mind. We build this incredibly weak house of inherited ideas, and then we literally worship it as a false idol of certainty. And these knots blind us. They make us fiercely defend our programming, blinding our visions so completely that we actually think we're being guided while we are wandering completely lost. We're trapped in a linguistic web that's engineered to keep us asleep. And that leads us straight into Section 2, the Samiri Mechanism and Psychological Knots. Standard interpretations usually assume that the stories in religious texts, like, say, the story of the Samiri who built the golden calf, are just historical logs about ancient, misguided nations. But let's gently dismantle that assumption right now. These verses are not history lessons. They are diagnosing real-time psychological manipulation happening to you, today. The Samiri isn't just a guy from the past, it's a mechanism. It's a systemic method of linguistic deception. So how does this illusion work today? Well, it operates by distorting the original placement of words, taking words totally out of their true context. It uses beautiful verbal ornaments to create comforting illusions, basically a modern-day golden calf of dogma. It completely substitutes the profound, world-shattering reality of the verses with a safe, superficial, harmless reading. This Samiri mechanism traps your mind in a fabricated matrix, blocking any true spiritual insight by making you think you already have all the answers. Which leads us to a massive, massive breakthrough realization in Section 3, Direct Divine Address to the Self. To actually shatter these knots, we have to completely change how we interact with the book. The traditional perspective reads the text in the third person, as a book about other people, other times, other prophets. But when we rebuild our understanding from the text itself, we discover something wild. The book is a direct, real-time conversation between the creator and you, the reader. When the text says his servant or abduhu, common assumption says, oh, that's talking about a historical prophet. But the deconstructive perspective reveals the shock of the truth. It's talking about you. Imagine you're working at a massive multinational corporation and you have a private intercom sitting on your desk. Suddenly, the CEO speaks directly through it, giving a specific order. If you assume the CEO is talking to an employee who retired 1,000 years ago, you're going to completely ignore the command, right? The ultimate authority is addressing you in the present moment. If you claim to be a servant of God, then the commands, the warnings, and the guidance are meant strictly and very personally for you right now. So what happens when we just ignore that direct intercom? Well, we experience the cycle of the fall. This isn't just the ancient story of Adam and Satan. It is the exact sequence of your own psychological failure. Look at the steps here. First, the verses arrive as a direct, real-time command to you. Second, you insulate yourself. You deflect it, thinking, oh, this is about historical Israel, or this is for the prophet, certainly not me. Third, by deflecting that direct address, you instantly strip yourself of your elevated status, which creates a massive spiritual void. And finally, deception rushes right into that void, and you fall from a high state of awareness, clinging heavily to earthly, superficial traditions. The text itself actually warns us of this exact mechanism. Listen to this. Recite to them the news of him to whom we gave our verses, but he detached himself from them. The inherited mindset reads this and thinks, look at that bad person in the past. But applying our new lens, the deconstructive perspective proves that reading the text as a mere bystander is the very definition of detaching oneself. The exact moment you say, this verse isn't about me, you have detached from it. You've insulated yourself from the divine intercom, and immediately the psychological deception, Satan, pursues you. Once we truly understand the mechanism of failure, we can transition over to the blueprint of success in Section 4, raising foundations and seeing truth. Think about it. If detaching ourselves builds this fragile spiderweb of illusion, how do we build a solid structure? Well, look at the stark contrast in real-world results. The source material emphasizes that a society built on true belief, meaning a direct, unmediated understanding of the text, produces heaven on earth. It literally results in a clean, free, just society where there's no poverty, where nature thrives, and where humans live with absolute dignity. On the flip side, blind tradition, the inherited matrix, produces a corrupt, toxic reality. It creates societies obsessed with greed, external dogma, judging others, and controlling people's lives. If you look around and see a broken, superficial society, you are looking at the exact product of inherited, blind tradition, no matter how loudly they claim to follow the truth. So, how do we actually build that utopian society? By raising the house, which is embodied by the archetypes of Abraham and Ishmael. And again, we are not just talking about historical guys piling up physical stones. We are unpacking psychological models for the mind. Abraham represents the archetype of true heritage, following a deeply logical, righteous path and completely disavowing all false idols, societal pressures, and corrupt traditions. Ishmael, on the other hand, represents the archetype of the perfect receiver, maintaining a state of continuous, active listening to the verses. Together, they represent the ultimate psychological blueprint for rejecting the matrix and actively listening to the absolute truth, which perfectly sets up Section 5. Freedom from forced systems. To truly listen like Ishmael, one must be completely free from oppressive, matrix-level religious structures. Inherited traditions absolutely love to force external conditions onto internal faith. They build these massive systems of control that demand you comply with their specific, man-made rules just to be considered part of the group. But the source text shatters this completely with a very simple rule. There's no compulsion in religion. The standard assumption is that faith requires rigid external validation and societal policing, but the deconstructed truth is that pure spiritual surrender requires absolute freedom. You cannot be forced into a relationship with the divine. Any system that forces societal compliance, that threatens or coerces you into belief, is operating entirely outside the true foundational text. This builds up to a profound realization. I have submitted my face to God. The source points out the ultimate absurdity of the matrix here. A person reads the text, feels the direct address, and says purely, I submit to God alone. But the forced societal system violently rejects this. The matrix says, no, that's not enough. You must also add our traditions, our mediators, our historical conditions to validate your spirituality. The pure, unforced internal submission to God alone is somehow deemed insufficient by the very people who claim to represent him. It's wild. So the crucial point is perfectly captured in this verse. And when God is mentioned alone, the hearts of those who do not believe in the hereafter shrink with aversion. This exposes a deep, terrifying psychological disease. The inherited matrix has actually conditioned the human mind to feel physical aversion, a shrinking feeling, when confronted with pure divine truth unattached to human traditions. The programmed mind desperately needs partners. It needs historical figures or traditional mediators alongside God. When presented with the pure, unpartnered source, the conditioned mind recoils. We are reaching the climax of our analysis now, in Section 6, unlocking the book's language.
If the matrix is built on distorted words, how do we actually read the source? Well, it demands a total paradigm shift. The book does not speak standard human language. It is a multi-dimensional matrix of its own. It has its own internal linguistic architecture, its own code, and its own completely unique logic. Traditional dictionaries, historical lexicons, and centuries of inherited human interpretations have essentially acted as heavy seals locked over the text. They lock away the true meaning by forcing purely human definitions onto divine concepts. But the book actually defines its own terms internally, cross-referencing itself to reveal the true reality.
To access this reality, we must focus on breaking the seals. The synthesis of our entire discussion emerges right here. True liberation requires a radical act, discarding all external lenses. You literally must abandon all external interpretations, mythologies, and historical baggage. You must treat the book not as an ancient artifact sitting on a shelf, but as a direct, living, conversational entity speaking to you right now. And finally, you must enter a state of absolute, unpartnered submission. Only when you completely strip away the noise of the matrix and stand as a true servant will the book define reality directly to yourself. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. We've reverse-engineered the trap of inherited certainty, we've exposed the psychological knots, and we've revealed that intercom waiting right there on your desk. The ultimate authority is broadcasting, but the frequency requires you to drop everything you ever thought you knew. If the book is speaking directly to you, right now, in this very moment, are you ready to shatter your inherited programming? Are you ready to stop being a historical bystander and finally become the servant? Take a moment to reconsider every single word you have ever read. The conversation is waiting.